Hello, this is Canto 22. Getting further and further into hell. This one is something of a continuation of previous canto, where we're in the circle, or should I say subcircle of Circle 8, having to do with the Barrators, which are, in a shorthand, political grafters, corrupt politicians, things of that nature. So we continue with the story, which had Dante and Virgil getting an escort of rather unsavory demons. Well, I guess there's no other type than unsavory demons. These are particularly unsavory. So we start with Canto 22. I have seen horsemen breaking camp. I have seen beginning of an assault, march of muster, and at times a retreat and riot. I have been where chargers trampled your land, or our teams. I've seen columns of foragers chalk a turning the run of tilts. I've seen endless lines march to bells, drums, trumpets from far and near. I've seen them march as signals from a castle. I've seen them march with native and foreign gear. Never yet have I seen horse or foot, nor ship in range of land, or sight of star take its direction from so low a toot. So he's talking about, of course, the end of Canto 21, where the devils had a signal, basically a fart. And he's mentioning also in this beginning 12 verses that he had a military career in the service of Florence. He went with the 10 Fiends, savage crew. But in Church of the Saints, stew pots in the tavern, as the old proverb wisely bids us do. All my attention was fixed upon the ditch. Observe the people who were bowling in it, customs and punishments of that ditch. As dolphins surface and begin to flip their arched backs the sea, warning the sailors to fall to, begin to secure ship, so now and then some soul, to ease his pain, showed us a glimpse of his back above the pitch. Quick as lightning disappeared again. Here's from the commentary from the Columbia University. This opening passage is thus a way of returning to the military context as one that bespeaks the functioning society, one is replete with the signs, symbols, and forms of semiosis. Semiosis, of course, a fancy word for the way we communicate with language. It's also a way to return to the last verse of Inferno 21 and the signal given there. And he made a trumpet of his ass. All his passive military experience and the experience of military forms of communication, he says that experience as replete with trumpets and bells, signals for castle walls, has never seen troops move by so strange a bugle as that resounding fart at the end of Inferno 21. As this commentary points out, this is a specific micro-society that's formed by the sinners of the fifth Moja, one that includes communication systems and sporting events. And indeed, Dante wants us to think about it, a corrupt society that is corrupted by lying and cheating and inability to trust anyone. This is sort of a hellish society that is formed by this particular sin and just sin in general. So we need to be alive to the contours of this society and his critique of his society and ours too, that he gives to this. And recall, as I mentioned before, and I'll mention again, that the Inferno gives one version of the way society functions, lowest version. Purgatory is something of a middle vision, and paradise, the best or completest version. The signals here in Inferno 22.8 call the signs exchanged between diabolic watchtowers and similar semiotic activity described as render cento to return the signal. This signal exchange occurs as the travelers approach the city of Dis, beginning of Inferno 8. And this is a quote here. I say, continuing, that long before we two have reached the foot of that tall tower, our eyes have been risen upwards towards its summit because of two small flames that flickered there, while still another flame returned their signal. So far off, it was scarcely visible. We are reminded that all encounters with the devils have involved challenge, obstruction, and most significantly, need to decode osteosemiosis. We recall that at the end of Canto 21, Malakota sent a reconnaissance party led by Barrators on a mission to make sure that no damned souls are outside of the boiling pitch. At that time, Malakota also instructed his troop to accompany Dante and Virgil to the next intact bridge over the Bulge. Accordingly, travelers are reassured by Malakota's having granted them apparent safe passage, having set out with 10 devils, or demons. Occasionally you see a sinner show his back above the surface like a dolphin, but most of all, they see sinners partly exposed at the edge of the Bulge like frogs at the margins of a ditch. These souls rush to submerge themselves when the devils approach. One unlucky soul is captured, as we shall see. And as, at the edge of the ditch, frogs squat about, hiding their feet and bodies in the water, leaving only their muzzles sticking out, so stood the sinners in that dismal ditch. But as Curly Beard approached, only a ripple showed where they had ducked back into the pitch. I saw, dread of it haunts me to this day, one linger a bit too long, as sometimes happens when frog veins, when the other spurts away. A cat claw was nearest, ran a hook, the sinner's pitchy hair, and hauled him in. Looked like an otter dripping from the brook. I knew the names of all the fiends by then. I had made a note of them, first muster, and marching, I listened and checked them over again. Hey, Crazy Red! The crew of demons cried all together. Give him a taste of your claws. Dig him open a little. Off with his hide. And I then, Master, can you find out, please, the name and history of that luckless one who has fallen into the hands of his enemies? My guide approached that wraith, the hot tar, asked him whence he came. Rich replied, I was born and raised in the kingdom of Navarre. My mother placed me in the service to a knight, for she had borne me to a squanderer, killed himself when he ran through his birthright. Then I became a domestic in the service of good King Theobald. Then I began to graft, and I account for this hot crevice. Tusk, with the ends of his lower lips, shot forth 2 teeth more terrible than the boar's, made the wretch feel that one of them could rip. The mouse had come among bad cats. Here, Curly Beard locked arms around him, crying, Well, I got hold of him. The rest stand clear. Turning his face to my guide, if you want to ask him anything else, he added, ask away before the others carry him limb from limb. So you see here that you have someone from the kingdom of Navarre. Navarre was a kingdom between Spain and France. Later, most of it was annexed to France in about 16th century, I believe. Now, I'm going to show you a little movie here that suggests how this operation of catching the sinners was like. Here it is. So, it's like a game of whack-a-mole. Sort of, Yuri. Give you some idea. That guy did pretty good, I thought, whacking the moles. This grafter, protagonist of the forthcoming episode, is not named in the text, but is commonly known in the commentary tradition as Shampolo. This is an Italian corruption of the French name Jean Paul. Shampolo explains that he is from the kingdom of Navarre in France. Well, I might mention that eventually becomes France, but right now it's his own kingdom. That his mother placed him in the service of the Lord, and that his father was a rake who squandered his possessions and killed himself. Eventually, he moved up and served in the household of King Theobald II of Navarre, where he began to practice graft. Let's unpack it a bit more. San Paulo was a son of a Ribaldo. His father was not poor, as Barbara B. points out in Sampegno's above citation. He had an inheritance to squander. San Paulo's father destroyed first his means and then himself. In other words, San Paulo was born into an environment of profound dysmenorrhea. Such a man is then put in service to a life in which he's surrounded by luxury and magnificence that is not his. His biography sounds like a recipe for the making of an embezzler. Indeed, it was, wasn't it? I think of Dante's Canzone, or poem, where he inveighs against those who squander their wealth while posing as generous citizens. Not suggesting that San Paulo's father follows in the later camp. He was a Baldo, a great, pure, and simple, never mistakenly considered a good citizen like the men Dante castigates in his Canzone. So now we continue with Canto 22. My guide to the sinner. I should like to know if any among the other souls beneath the pitch are any Italians. And the wretch, just now, I left a shade who came from parts nearby. Would I was still in the pitch with him. Then his hooks would not be giving me a cause to cry. Suddenly Grafter bellowed in great heat. Wisdom enough! He hooked the sinner's arm, breaking it, ripped off a chunk of meat. Then Dragon Tooth wanted to play too, reaching down for a catch at the sinner's legs. But Curlybeard wheeled round with a terrifying frown. When the fiends somewhat given ground and calmed a little, my guide, without delay, asked the wretch who was staring at his wound, who was the sinner, say you made your evil star departure to come ashore among the fiends? The wretch was a shade of Friar Amita of Galeria, crooked stem of every fraud. His master's enemies are in his hands. He won high praise from them. Took their money without case or docket and let them go. He was in all his dealings no petty verser, but a kingly pocket. With him, his endless crony in the fossa is Don Miquel Zamche of Londoro. He babbled about Sardinia without pause. But look, see that fiend grinning at your side? It's more than I should like to tell you. Oh, I think he means to greet my hide. The grim sergeant wheeled, sensing foul play, turning on Cramper, who seemed set to strike, ordered, Clear off, you buzzard! Clear off, I say. Either you like to see or hear Tuscans or Lombards, the pale sinner said. I can lure them out of hiding if you stand clear. Let me sit here, edge of the ditch. Get all these black Italians out of sight. While they're here, no one will leave the pitch. In exchange for myself, I can fish you up as pretty a mess of souls as you like. I have only to whistle when you do, one of us. Sport has paid hell with the features of vernacular burlesque beffa in novella tradition. It's a reflection of the Inferno society that invented it. It's a game of interlocking, mutual, and complete deception. Remember, I was mentioning this to you previously. Canto, that this is a depiction of a early corrupt society, a micro society. It's also important to stipulate that it is a game. In other words, Dante intends his optic on human society, human cultural artifacts, to be broad enough to take in those essential staples of human life: games, play, and sport. You think back to the Aeneid, Latin poem that Dante just told us he knew entirely, and remember that Virgil devoted 5 of his epic to games played by displaced Trojans. Barataria, and remember Barataria is barratry or graft and corruption, is corruption of civil governments. And the result of civil graft is the corruption of social order. Hence, in the Canti devoted to Barataria, Dante would create the contours of a specific micro-society as deeply corroded by mutual and absolute lack of trust. That small society is on display in Inferno 22, canto that emphasizes distinctive features of human society, such as courtly life and novel sport. 2 Sardinian grafters are part of a Sardinian network, Commedia. Describing Frate Comita, Giampaolo refers to the Lord he betrayed by the Sardinian term Donna. Sardinia was conquered by Pisa in 1117. Frate Camito's lord was Nino Visconti, who ruled the Giudicato of Galeria on behalf of Pisa from 1275 to 1296. Nino Visconti was grandson of the Pisan noble Ugolino della Garabandesco. Sardinia will be implicated in the story of Ugolino in Inferno 32. Nino Visconti was also Dante's personal friend, as we learn in Purgatorio 8, where he carries his Sardinian title of judge. In effect, the Inferno 32 and 33 will be the dark locus which the corruption and politics of Pisa, therefore of its possession Sardinia, will come to a head. You see there's all kinds of connections between the various cantos and also between Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Sometimes they're very complicated and hard to ferret out. The other Sardinian grafter is Michele Zance, who will also be linked intertextually to Inferno 33. Michele Zance's son-in-law is the traitor Brache Doria, whose soul is in the ninth circle. As we shall see, Brache Doria had his father-in-law, Michele Zance, murdered in order to acquire his lands in Dominion. It sounds very nice. So now we continue with Inferno 22. Dead Dog raised his snout as he listened to him, then shaking his head said, "Listen to the grafter spinning his tricks so he can jump from the brim." And the sticky wretch was all treachery. "Oh, I am more than tricky when there's a chance to see my friends greater misery." Elkin, against the will of all the crew, could hold on no longer. "You jump," he said, the scheming wretch. "I will come after you at a gallop, like a hawk after a mouse. We'll clear the edge and hide behind the bank. Let's see if you're trickster enough for all of us. Reader, here's a new game." Fiends withdrew from the bank's edge, and Dead Dog, at first was most against it, led the savage crew. Navarrese chose his moment carefully, planting both his feet against the ground, leaped. In an instant he was free. The fiends were stung with shame, and all in the lot, Elkin most, had been the cause of it. He leaped out madly bellowing, "You're caught!" No good it did him. Terror pressed harder than wings. The sinner dove from sight, and the fiend, full flight, had to raise his breast. "Duck!" When the falcon dies, he disappears exactly so, all in a flash, while he returns defeated and weary up in the air. Grizzly, in a rage at the sinner's flight, flew after Helkin, hoping the wraith would escape so he might find an excuse to start a fight. And as soon as the grafters sank on the pitch, Grizzly turned his talons against Helkin, blocked with him claw above the ditch. Helkin was a sparrowhawk enough for two. He clawed him well, and ripping one another, they plunged together into the hot stew. Heat broke up the brow immediately. Their wings were smeared with pitch. They could not rise. Earlybeard, upset as his company commanded four to fly to the other coast at once. All their grapples at top speed, the fiends divided, each one to his post. Champollion is offering to abuse the trust of his companions in order to secure Tuscans and Lombards. In return, the travelers will induce the devils to stand away from him. He is trying to negotiate a truce like the one for whose terms the Pisan foot soldiers left Castle Campronio, which you can read about in last Canto 21. Castle of Campronio is one of the castles which liberated the Florentines and involved Galino's fall of power in Pisa. Again, all roads lead to Inferno 32-33. Champollion tries to secure the devil's compliance by stressing the magnitude of his offer to deceive his fellows. He must be telling them the truth because he is offering to harm his friends. There is a brief standoff as each team tries to ascertain the level of deceit of the other. Then mayhem ensures as Champollion finds a moment to free himself to dive back in the pitch. Here is the culmination of the Novo Ludo that allures the game, with devils in hot pursuit. In their anger and spite of being deceived by a sinner, devils turn upon each other, and at the canto's ends, the cooks are cooked. In some, Champollion offers to betray his fellows in order to betray the devils, who betray each other in their eagerness to betray the sinners, and their enthusiasm to have Champollion betray his comrades. Got it? Here's an illustration from Shando Burke, who places the Inferno in modern-day Los Angeles. And you may not be able to see the sign, what it says on his Holiday Inn, but it says, "Welcome, Pilgrims." And this is a question from David Bruce's commentary on the Divine Comedy. The question is, why are the devils fooled so easily? Answering this question involves interpretation, because the answer is not spelled out in the Inferno. It appears that the devils allow themselves to be fooled so easily because they wish to pick a quarrel with one particular devil. Champollion uses a rhetorical technique in his attempt to deceive the devil. First tells what is apparently a true history of his life. By telling the truth, including that he is tricky, then following it with a lie, Champollion attempts to make the devils believe the lie is the truth. Champollion does persuade one devil, Alcerio. However, the other devils may be pretending to believe Champollion in order to fight with him. The devil named Alcino wishes to accept Champollion's devious offer. The devil named Carnazzo is suspicious of Champolion's offer from the very beginning, but he is first to turn to hide himself as Champollion has requested the devils to do. Of course, we are told specifically that Carnazzo is hoping that the shade would make it, so he could pick a fight with his companion. One interpretation is that the other devils are like Carnazzo, knowing that the sinner wishes to escape and hoping that he wood so that they can fight without Sheila. And remember that the translation I'm using is from John Ciardi, where he translates the devil's names into English, whereas some of the others do not. That's why we got these Italian names for the devil, is particularly rendered commentary. And here is a commentary from Musso. Second lie of Cantos 21-23 is Sciapollo's device to escape the claws of the Malebolge, which are the evil claws. Devils will hide or whistle, thus summon his fellow sinners from below the pitch, in order to get his friends into worse trouble than he himself is in. Thus he tells the devils that he will lie to his friends by whistling to let them know that the coast is clear. Actually, he's lying to the devils. They are suspicious, but they agree to hide and play the game. San Polo escapes. In San Polo, for the first time in Inferno, you see a sinner actually performing a sin. For the clever way in which San Polo constructs his lie is in Virgil and Dante. His admission that he's tricky, his well-timed leap into the pitch, all show the sin of fraud in action. Just as Malcolm joined his lie with a very minute truthful description of times that the bridge had fallen, Canto 21, so San Polo leads up to his lie with a precise, truthful statement of the major facts of his life. An admixture of precise truth, falsehood gives, in both cases, an aura of unquestioned truth was ultimately a fraud. And that method, too, comes, of course, from experience, sin of Barrators. Now, here is the end of Canto 22. Some on the near edge, some along the far, they stretched their hooks out to the clotted pair, were already cooked deep through the scar of their first burn. Turning to one side, we slipped off, leaving them thus occupied. So Canto 22 still ends in the middle of the story because we see Dante and Virgil slipping off, but we know the devils, once they get their act together, may not be happy about Dante and Virgil slipping off. A complex and perverse social order unfolds in Inferno 22, a micro-society furnished its own science systems, even its own sports. Sinners have their own communications and codes of governments, all deeply rooted in malice and betrayal. Narrator uses San Polo, Novo, Ludo, and the subsequent havoc to conclude Inferno 22, delay the next act of this play in 4 acts. Act 4, which returns the overarching plot line, seek practiced by Malebolge on Dante and Virgil, and it resumes in the next canto, Canto 3. Inferno 22, like Inferno 8 and Inferno 16 before it, ends in the Betis race in the middle of things. In other words, it's Dante again works to script suspense to his overturned plot. Devils have been humiliated. Instead of being the cooks engaged in submerging the sinners, they are now themselves cooked with tar. They seek to avenge themselves on Dante and Virgil. That's a question we're going to answer in Inferno 23. This is some reflection on Canto 22 taken from the book Spiritual Direction from Dante by Paul Pearson. And here it is. It's about the ultimate weakness of evil, the disintegrating power of evil. When early philosophers tried to explain the possibility of evil in the world, they concluded that there must be 2 causes of the universe we see. One who is a good, and another who is evil. These two causes must be equal in power, otherwise one would have won the battle between them by now. This theory is called dualism because it holds the existence of two independent internal causes. Evil must be an impressive reality if it's capable of dueling an all-powerful and good God to a draw. But evil is not like this. Lucifer and the other fallen angels, the devils and his minions, left their glory behind when they rebelled against God. What remains in them is still powerful, but it is also both despicable and laughable. And even if they were not affected by their fall, they are merely creatures of God. He made them ultimate being and them for his purposes. Do not romanticize them as literature has done. The literature certainly has romanticized the devil and his minion. Previous canto ends, and this one begins with what is obviously a display of bathroom humor. Devils are called into action by unexpected sort of trumpet call. He made him a bugle of his ass. This provides some of the only comic relief we will be granted on our journey through hell. Perhaps this is a subtle reminder those who abuse their positions of authority, although they might insist upon displays of respect, shows of status, are in fact ridiculous figures. These thuggish devils are sort of underlings corrupt officials might have hired while they were in power during their lives on earth. But these civic leaders would never associate with them in other ways. Hence, low lives have taken low lives have taken control, and the sophisticated grafters have no choice to humor them, obey them when necessary, and maneuver to stay clear of them. These devils, ignorant though they may be, treat the sinners here with a sort of contempt. They provide for the sinners most personal revelation of what each of them did, those under authority on earth. Regardless of how highly these men of rank thought of themselves while alive, underneath it all, they're like these devils. And so that brings another point to consider in this canto. And remember, in each canto, there's several things going on. We said this canto, what was going on is the idea of the corruption of society through graft and distrust and lying. But also, as we see is now, there's an idea of the fact that evil is not glamorous or beautiful or respectful, but is often just very thuggish and brutal and kind of stupid. And one example of this being demonstrated is through C.S. Lewis's novel Perelandra, which was the second of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. This is the story is Perelandra, also known as Voice of Venus, the second installment of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy. Published in 1943, the story picks up where Out of Silent Planet left off, follows the account of Dr. Elwin Ransom as he journeys Earth to Venus. Upon landing there, Dr. Ransom discovers that the planet is a new Eden, whose King Adam and Queen Eve have never known evil. The reason for his summons is soon revealed in the form of the Silent Planet's antagonist, Professor Weston, who seeks to corrupt Eve. The novel's main momentum evolves as Dr. Ransom must prevent Weston from bringing about a new fall of man on his uncorrupted. Now we'll start in basically the middle of the story where Ransom is combating Weston, which really has been taken over by the devil, so he's really talking with a point of evil, a demon, as they try to win over one or the other force, win over the ladies' allegiance. was the eve of this planet. So here we start. Body that had been Weston threw up its head, opened its mouth, and gave a long, melancholy howl like a dog. The lady lay down, only unconcerned, closed her eyes, and was instantly asleep. While the two things were happening, a piece of ground on which the two men stood, woman lay, were rushing down a great hillside of water. Ransom kept his eyes fixed upon the enemy, but took no notice of him. His eyes moved like the eyes of a living man. It was hard to be sure what they were looking at, or whether it really used eyes as organs of vision at all. One got the impression of a force that cleverly kept the pupils of those eyes fixed in a suitable direction, while the mouth talked, but which, for its own purpose, used only different modes of perception. The thing sat down close to the lady's head, on the far side of her from Ransom, if you could call it so. The body did not reach its squatting position by normal movements of a man. It was more as if some external force maneuvered it to the right position and then let it drop. It was impossible to point to any particular motion which was definitely non-human. Ransom had a sense of watching imitation of living motions which had been very well studied and was technically correct. Somehow lacked the master touch. He was chilled with an inarticulate night nursery horror of the thing he had to deal with. Man-aged corpse, bogey, unmanned. There's nothing to do but to watch. Sit there, forever if need be, guarding the lady from the unmanned, while their island climbed interminably over the Alps and Andes of the burnished water. All three very still. Beasts and birds came often and looked upon them. Hours later, the unmanned began to speak, not even look in Ransom's direction. Slowly and cumbrously, as if by some machinery that needed oiling, made its mouth and lips pronounce his name. Ransom, he said. Well, said Ransom. Nothing, said the unmanned. He shot an inquisitive glance at it. Was the creature mad? But it looked, as before, dead rather than mad, sitting there with head bowed, mouth a little open. Some yellow dust from the moss settled in the creases of its cheeks. The legs crossed tailor-wise, and the hands, with their long, metallic-looking nails, pressed flat together on the ground before it. Dismissed the problem from his mind and returned to his own uncomfortable thoughts. Ransom, said he. What is it? Said Ransom sharply. Nothing, answered. In their silence, and again, another minute later, Horrible Mouth said, Ransom! This time he made no reply. Another minute, uttered his name again. Then, like a minute ago, Ransom! 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 Perhaps 100 times. What the hell do you want? Roared at once, Lance. Nothing, said the voice. Next time he's determined not to answer. But when it called on him 1,000 times, he found himself answering whether he would or not. And nothing came to reply. He taught himself to keep silent and not that the torture of resisting his impulse to speak was less than the torture of response, but because something within him rose up to combat the tormentor's assurance that he must yield in the end. If the attack had been of some more violent kind, might have been easier to resist. Chilled and almost cowed him was a union of malice with something nearly childish. For temptation, for blasphemy, or whole battery of horrors, he was in some sort prepared. Hardly for this petty, indefatigable nagging of a nasty little boy at a preparatory school. Indeed, no imagined horror could have suppressed the sense which grew within him as the slow hours passed, that this creature was, all human standards inside out. His heart on the surface, and shallowness at the heart. On the surface, great designs and antagonism heaven should involve the fate of worlds. Deep within, when every veil had been pierced, was there, after all, nothing but black virility, aimless empty spitefulness, intent to save itself with the tiniest cruelty, as love does not disdain the smallest kindness. What kept him steady long after the possibility of thinking about something else had disappeared was the decision that he must hear either word ransom or the word for nothing a million times. He would prefer the word ransom. And all the time, little jeweled colored land went soaring up to the yellow firmament, hung there a moment, tilted in the woods, and went racing down to the warm, lustrous depths between the waves. The lady lay sleeping, one arm bent beneath her head, her lips a little parted, sleeping assuredly, for her eyes are shut, her breathing irregular, yet not looking quite like those asleep in our world, but her face was full of expression and intelligence. Limbs looked as if they were ready at any moment to leap up, although she gave the impression sleep was not a thing happened to her, but an action which she performed. Then all at once it was night. Ransom! 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 Went on the voice. Suddenly it crossed his mind, though he would sometime require sleep, unmanned might not. So you see a vision of evil that is at once evil and menacing, but also somewhat real and not very sophisticated. And here's a continuation of that idea. Dante describes Satan as a horrible monster that earlier was very beautiful. This is Satan that we'll see in Canto 34. But now is a giant creature with three heads, one red, which symbolizes hate, one white/yellow, which symbolizes fragility, and one black, which symbolizes ignorance. He is a sort of ugly bird with enormous wings, similar to the wings of a bat. Satan cries because he is sad for his situation. Milton describes Satan at first as a fallen angel. He takes the form of a snake. He has some characteristics of an epic hero. He is very strong, powerful, and courageous. Ambitious, proud creature, which has plotted against God, accepts the situation, finds a positive aspect of hell. He has the opportunity of showing his power because he can reign. And we will talk more about this image of Satan, get to that canto. For now, this idea that Dante's is quite a bit different from some of the other depictions of the devil, including Milton. Then, finally, we have this point from Dorothy Sayers' commentary. Tricked in quarreling demons, though it may present an appearance of solidarity, Satan's kingdom is divided against itself, cannot stand, for it has no true hope. Fear is his only discipline. Moreover, in the long run, the devil is a fool. Trickery preys on trickery, cruelty on cruelty. And here, just toward at the end, is where I am in front of Dante's monument, the church at Santa Croce, Sacred Cross in Florence. Florence does not have his body still is still in Ravenna, but they built a really nifty monument to him in the church. So that concludes this week's Canto. I'll talk to you next week about Canto 28.